Gang, and welcome back to another Freakish Fridays. Tattooed Biker here with you. And in tonight's video, we delve into the dark and mysterious world of the deep woods. Prepare yourself for bone-chilling and unexplained encounters that were sent in by you, our brave viewers. Get ready to be captivated and on the edge of your seat as we recount these spine-tingling tales of the unknown. But before we begin, remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any future stories of the unexplained and the unsolved. So now, let's get ready to ride into the deep woods. Number 1. Hey Biker, I've never been a big fan of camping, but back in 2012, for some reason or another, my friend and I decided to take a Saturday night to camp on private property. We had permission from the owner, on the bank of a small lake in the rural American southeast. The lake wasn't very large, probably only 50 to 150 yards across. It was more of a deep pond, but it was 5 times as long as it was wide, and from the perspective of our camp, it consumed the majority of our sightline. The plot of land itself wasn't entirely removed from civilization. We were maybe 10 miles outside of a small suburb of a mid-sized southern city. It definitely was not easy to access, however, and the only way in was a gated, narrow dirt road across a levee which spanned one side of the lake. This road was gated and locked. The owner had given us his code. We pulled the car through and locked the gate behind us. If you've ever been down south, you know how quickly it gets isolated outside of cities. Our cities are small, and the rural people around them often live rough and wild. We have dense woods, so thick that they're not worth building in unless you have some connection or attachment to the area. I've heard it was not profitable to cut roads through a lot of it when they were building highways in the 50s, so not much development has happened in the last 100 years, and in some places, not since the Civil War. It's not uncommon to go for a 30-minute drive straight out of town and come across cabins that are obviously off the grid. My friend and I were used to living in the suburbs, so we were just happy to see stars and hear the sounds of nature. We were at our small, basic camp, a small Coleman 2-person tent and a blanket, simply looking around and enjoying the night when suddenly my buddy sat up real straight. He said something like, "Do you see that guy over there?" He pointed to the other side of the small lake. I didn't see anything. I sat up slightly and said, "Nah, it's just the dark playing tricks on you." He seemed actually shaken. "No, look, there's a bunch of faces behind the trees now." That got my attention, and I sat up fully, rubbing my eyes to try and gain full focus. And then I saw them. Small, round, white faces stared back at me from across the lake. There was maybe 15 or 20 of them. All were positioned in such a way that their bodies were behind the trees and only their heads were visible. The best way I can describe the faces is like very pale, somehow internally illuminated children. I should mention that neither of us were drinking or high. We were still too young for that. We had eaten dinner at home and were just planning on going to sleep after chilling out for a while. The faces weren't moving. I was kind of sitting there in shock, thinking that my eyes would adjust and I would see that they were a reflection, bugs or owls or anything. But I would never come to that realization. I stared right back at them for what felt like 5 minutes, looked back at my friend, and then they were gone. Bodies of water carry sound extremely well, and we heard extensive shuffling from the other side of the lake and a few small branches snapping. It's incredible what your ears pick up on during an otherwise silent night. My buddy was tearing up a little when he said, "What the hell were those?" And I didn't have a good answer. Neither of us slept particularly well. I definitely felt validated in my feelings of disliking camping, but what were we going to do? I tried to do some research on the internet, but I never found a phenomena that could explain anything like that. Signed, Bobby. Number 2. Hey, Tattooed Biker. So I've been sitting on this experience a while. I guess just not wanting to make a big deal out of nothing, but after finding your channel, I kind of wanted to share and find out what your viewers thought. Back in March of this year, I went camping with a friend, my boyfriend, and 3 dogs. My friend slept in his tent with his dog, and I slept in my tent with my 2 dogs and my boyfriend. My friend's tent was about 30 feet away from ours, and we were camping in the northern Georgia mountains off an old Forest Service road. We were also right next to a creek. For context, I'm an experienced backpacker, and I'm familiar with the usual nighttime sounds, like rustling in the leaves, sticks breaking, cicadas, etc. I have a lot of experience camping by myself, so it's rare that I get spooked out by anything other than humans nearby, as I'm aware of the dangers of traveling solo as a woman. However, this particular night I wake up in the middle of the night with a sense of absolute dread that I've never felt before. I check my phone and it's about 3:30 a.m. I really had to use the bathroom and was debating on whether I wanted to try and put on my hiking boots and venture outside to go or just try and hold it until daylight. I didn't want to wake up the dogs because if they heard me putting on my boots, they'd likely want to go outside. I'm still in the tent, and that's when I notice it. It's almost like a hum, but not in the pleasant way, where it's a tune or anything like that. It's a low-pitched hum that was reverberating throughout the campsite and forest, and even through my own body. It had 2 tones. It started with a relatively higher pitch, and then would switch to the relatively lower pitch after a period of time. Then it would start over without a break in the sound at all. It wasn't soft either. It felt like it was covering the entire wooded area we were in. It didn't sound like an animal, a person, a machine, or anything that I've ever heard. At this point, I absolutely cannot hold off on the bathroom trip any longer. I quickly throw on my hiking boots and quietly tell the dogs to stay put. My boyfriend is still sleeping. I unzip the tent and go outside, and the entire campsite was covered in this really thick, spooky fog. But it felt like it was my vision that was foggy, not the actual air. I couldn't see a damn thing. The 2-tone humming got even louder. I do my business maybe only 5 feet from the tent. Sorry, but there's no way I was venturing out any further than that, and quickly nope the hell back to my tent and bury myself into my sleeping bag with a sweatshirt over my head to try and drown out or ignore the humming. The dogs raised their heads and growled a few times throughout the experience, but that isn't unusual for them when camping. I never saw any figures or lights in the woods, but I also wasn't looking for them and was trying to ignore the entire experience. Does anyone know what this humming could have been? Thanks. Signed, Jesse. Number 3. Dear Tattooed Biker, here's my story. I hope it makes it to video. This really happened. It was in the summer of 2005, and a friend of mine, Wayne, and I decided to spend the day fishing at Upper Swagger Lake in the Lost River mountain range of Idaho. Visited mostly by locals, this alpine lake is tucked up on a ridge, overseeing 2 long, dry canyons on opposite sides. It sits at the top of the tree line, providing an uninhibited view of the sky and surrounding mountain peaks. The fishing is usually pretty good, if you like golden trout. I hate trout. To me, they taste like mud. But I do love fishing, and some of the best, most secluded lake fishing can be found on these high Idaho lakes. Getting to Swagger Lake is not an easy task. It's a 100-mile journey over a lonely highway from the region's largest town, Idaho Falls. When you hit the dirt road turnoff, there are miles of 4-wheel driving up to the canyon to the hiking trail. Once at the trailhead, it's still a 2-mile, 1,000 vertical gain hike up to the lake. But when you finally arrive, surrounded by the bald peaks of the little lost range, it's all worth the effort. Arriving at the lake around noon, we spent the day fishing, relaxing, and chatting. Far down in the canyon, out of sight from us, we continually heard periodic loud blasts. Growing up in the rural U.S., you get accustomed to people target shooting on public land, and that's what we concluded was happening below us. From the sheer thunderousness, we guessed it was a large caliber muzzle-loading rifle. The blasts were spaced out long enough that they had to be manually reloading their guns. The shots reverberated and echoed throughout the entire canyon. Whoever was down there was having a bit of fun with their rifle. Unperturbed by the cacophony down in the canyon, we continued fishing, only momentarily reminded of the explosions as they continued to occur throughout the day. The fishing was great and the day seemed to flash by. Before we knew it, the sun was cresting on the mountains. We headed back to camp for the night. Wayne had caught his limit toward the ends of the day, while I had been releasing mine. We settled down to a campfire and watched the sun sink behind the mountain peaks as Wayne cooked his muddy fish. It was twilight now. Aside from the crackling of the fire, it was a quiet evening. The sky was absolutely clear, and we watched as the stars twinkled into existence in the sky. Our relaxation was interrupted by yet another one of those thunderous explosions. Only this time, much closer to us. That was weird. Target shooting is extremely dangerous at night. Whoever was down there in the canyon was being very irresponsible. Wayne nudged me with his elbow and motioned for me to look in the direction of the sound of the last explosion. While not directly visible to us, there was a light down in the canyon. It was illuminating the entire area. From the angles of the tree shadows, we could see the source of the light was not at ground level. It was up high in the air, and it was moving. We watched in bewildered silence as the light moved up the canyon. We still couldn't get a direct line of sight on it. There was another blast that seemed to shake my skull. The light in the canyon flashed, almost 100 times brighter than before. We could absolutely not make sense of what was happening. As we sat there, unsure of what to do, the light rose upwards out of the canyon. As it crested the trees and continued to rise, we could finally get a direct look. It was a brilliant ball of yellow, golden light. Getting a size estimate was difficult, but I figured it was between 20 to 40 feet in diameter. The light rose silently above the canyon and then above our elevation at the lake. It stopped several hundred feet above the surrounding landscape and just stayed there. The object's surface shimmered and danced. Little feathers of sparks would periodically jump away from the object and fall down towards the trees below. Wayne looked at me, and all I could do was shrug my shoulders and give him a I have no idea look. After a few minutes, the ball's surface stopped dancing. It was completely still in the air above us. No sound, no movement. Then, with no warning, it exploded in a deafening shower of sparks and blinding light. Wayne and I instinctively jumped into the dirt and covered our heads. The light was so bright I could see it through my closed eyelids. The explosion shook everything around us, and I could feel the shock resonate in the ground beneath me. It was like the world was coming undone at the seams, and then everything went absolutely silent and dark. The whole event could have only been a handful of seconds long, but it felt like hours. When we looked up into the sky, the ball of light was gone. We were left alone in just the dim light of the stars. Picking myself up out of the dirt, all I could say to Wayne was, "What in the hell was that about?" He just chuckled nervously, but didn't reply. We surveyed the camp and the surrounding area. Nothing seemed damaged or even disturbed. There were no signs of fires that were started from the explosion. It was just like nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened. The one thing that was off, though, was the time. It was late twilight, when the light exploded above us, but my watch was showing 2 o'clock in the morning. Further baffling us was Wayne's fish. They were now charred cinders above a bed of coals that was once our campfire. I'm well aware of the phenomena of missing time, but that was not possible. The stupid thing exploded. We hit the dirt and then we picked ourselves up. Couldn't have been more than a couple minutes from the explosion to us getting back up. I don't have the mental capacity to process what happened. I headed to my tent and went right to sleep. It was a deep and dreamless sleep. When I awoke, the morning sun was illuminating the tent. Wayne was already up and fishing. I asked him about his thoughts on what happened last night, and he simply shrugged and said, "It either didn't happen, or we saw something we probably shouldn't have. It's that, or Marvin the Martian tried to kill us." We fished for a few hours that morning, then decided against camping another night at the lake. We packed up camp and hiked down to our vehicle. This happened almost 20 years ago, and I've been back to Swagger Lake several times over the years. I've never seen or heard anything like what we saw on that night ever again. I don't have an explanation for what happened, and don't believe I ever will. Swagger Lake coordinates are as follows: 44 degrees, 04, 55 north. 113 degrees, 34, 46 west. Signed, Nick. Number 4. Hey TB, my professor saw a strange rectangle on a mountain road. Here's what happened. When I went to college, I befriended a professor of mathematics. He was one of the most intelligent, eloquent, and articulate people that I've ever known. A remarkable family man. He married in his 20s with a daughter and a son. He never drank or smoked, never used drugs, never permitted himself to curse, raise his voice, or become aggressive, even in disagreements. He was always in control, always punctual and on time, always organized and very disciplined. And he wore clothing that would not look out of place at the turn of the 20th century. He was, in all aspects, a true gentleman. I'm just telling you what kind of man he was. Not a crazy man, not a junkie, no mental illnesses. I had the pleasure of taking advanced algebra, calculus 1, calculus 2, and differential equations with him. Anyway, we had this STEM club room in the math department, where we students hung out to study and chit-chat. And sometimes our professor would join us for help with tutoring, homework, and exam study help. Sometimes just discussions about various unrelated topics. One time he told us a story about when he saw something strange in the woods. This happened during the 90s, when he was a teenager. He lived in Quincy, California during the time, and he had a hobby of driving his dad's old beat-up truck all over the Sierra Nevada mountains, just for exploring and also for hunting animals and gathering wild berries. He liked following old mining roads and seeing where they led. One such time he was out looking for blackberries to pick. It was getting late and the sun had set. So he was driving down this narrow road when he saw there was an obstruction in the road. He saw that it looked like someone had stretched a giant plastic bag across the road. He thought it might have been construction work or something. As he drove up to what he thought was a plastic bag, he stopped his vehicle within like 40 feet of it, and that's when he saw that it wasn't a plastic bag. It was like some kind of screen or curtain, a two-dimensional flat shape, stretching over the road perpendicular to it. It was a rectangular shape with the width of the road and about 1.5 times the height. And he saw that it was translucent, like some kind of hologram. It was like semi-transparent because when my professor shined a flashlight through the rectangle, the light penetrated through it, illuminating the road past it, but just barely, like the light only went about a foot or two beyond the screen. It was just standing or floating there. And yet it wasn't attached to anything. It held its own weight, but it was like weightless at the same time. Its surface was wavy or rippling. After he got out of the car to investigate this strange, floating rectangle, he had gone right up to it, and when he did, he said it was emitting a vibration or a low humming, that he could feel it in his bones. There was an effect that the closer to the rectangle, the stronger the vibration was on the objects around it. And as he got close to it, he could see the hair on his arms standing up, like there was some kind of energy in the air. And there were dense trees on each side of the road, so he couldn't go around this rectangle in the middle. He went up to the trees and broke off a branch. He then poked the branch into this rectangle, and he saw subtle ripples going up and down through the rectangle from the place where he touched the surface. And he stuck the stick all the way into the rectangle, and there was no resistance. But he didn't see the stick going through the other side. It was like it disappeared or became invisible. And then he pulled it out, and the stick was unchanged, not burned or deformed. Not knowing what this rectangle was, he'd gone back to his car, continually looking back at it. He didn't want to risk driving through the rectangle, so he drove his car in reverse until the road became wide enough to turn around and head back where he had come from. To this day, he doesn't know what it was. He said it looked like a two-dimensional shape, like a semi-transparent rectangle stretched across the road. He didn't know how it was possible for a two-dimensional shape to just be floating like that, but he had seen it with his own eyes. I don't know if he ever went back there to find out. He didn't elaborate. He didn't even say exactly where this was. This was just when we were chatting in the club room after 6 p.m., doing homework or just resting and eating snacks. And I never got back into contact with him after graduating, moving out of that college town, and then the pandemic hit. I don't know, but I suspect that's one of the things that pushed him to become a professor of mathematics. Seeing a rectangle in the middle of the road, that's not something that happens every day, now is it? Anyway, that's all I know. Thanks for reading, Biker. Signed, Grace. And that concludes our journey into the depths of the deep woods and the eerie encounters that have taken place there. I hope you enjoyed these unnerving stories and that they sent a shiver down your spine. If you have your own creepy experiences to share, please let me know in the comments down below. It might just get featured in a future video. So till next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.